Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Canada has given approval to a new COVID-19 vaccine, which clears the way for thousands of doses. But when will the rest be arriving? Some of the province's new COVID-19 restrictions are now in place. We reach out to community leaders to find out how the new measures are impacting them. And there's an Alberta MLA who says his colleagues need to take a 20% pay cut.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. It's a decision that will put Canada on the path of getting lives back to normal. Canada became just the third country in the world after Britain and Bahrain to approve the COVID-19 vaccine from Pfizer and BioNTech. This will clear the way for the delivery of 249,000 doses to arrive by the end of the month. That should be enough vaccine for around 125,000 people. Health Canada says everyone can feel confident that the review process was rigorous and that strong monitoring systems are in place.
The review involved a dedicated team of our most experienced reviewers with expertise in a wide variety of scientific domains, including clinical medicine, biochemistry, immunology, and other disciplines relevant to the development, testing, manufacturing, and quality control of vaccines. We concluded that there was strong evidence supporting that the benefits of the vaccine outweighed the risks, and the manufacturer can scale up production while providing consistent assurance of quality.
The vaccine was found to be 94.7% effective among people over the age of 65. Britain began inoculating people yesterday, and today warned that 2 people with a history of allergies had adverse reactions to the drug. Federal Conservative leader Erin O'Toole welcomed the announcement that Health Canada has approved Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine. He said he plans to take it himself, but he wants to know about the government's plans for helping the provinces distribute it.
Vaccine is good news. You know, we've been asking and hoping for vaccine for some time. I also think it's great we're getting a sample of the vaccine from Pfizer so that we can test our systems. The military was stood up recently and we'll be able to test delivery. Obviously, it's a vaccine with very cold storage. So it's good news, and Canadians need good news in a pandemic close to Christmas, and we've been asking for a plan. We've been asking for a vaccine, so I'm happy when we get some. While I was in my meeting, I got the news on the Health Canada approval. We're going to be reviewing that, but the early indications we saw was the efficacy rate was very high, mid-90s, very good. The safety rate is also very high and in line with normal influenza vaccines. So I think this is why we need to plan. Canadians have questions. Supporters of all political parties have questions. The more information we have in the plan, the more Canadians will feel comfortable with what's coming in the new year when most of the vaccines arrive.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley has been following this story quite closely. So Canada is receiving 249,000 doses, but when will the rest be arriving?
We're expecting 6 million doses by the end of March. That's enough to vaccinate 3 million people. That would essentially take care of our healthcare workers, the most essential of them, and people over the age of 80. Then you start going down, people from 70 to 79. They're the next most at-risk group. People that have heart conditions fit into that. General Rick Hillier, who is leading Ontario's vaccine distribution program, said, don't expect things to ramp up really until April 1st. And then after that, it will take 6 to 9 months to look after the rest of us.
Catch the full interview with Mr. Lilley, who will also talk about a Christmas card campaign, which has been launched for the 2 Canadian Michaels being held captive in China. That interview is coming up after Business News. Alberta's Health Minister Tyler Shandro says the new vaccines coming out will be available in Alberta beginning next week, more specifically Wednesday, December 16th.
With Health Canada's approval of the Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for use in this country, we are activating our plans to begin vaccinating the first group of healthcare workers. To protect those caring for our most vulnerable, the first 3,900 doses will go to ICU doctors and nurses, respiratory therapists, and long-term care workers throughout the province. These staff are exhausted and they've put themselves at risk for 10 months.
There were 1,640 new COVID-19 cases today, along with 5 new deaths in Alberta. The province says there are 20,199 active cases of the novel coronavirus in our province. That includes 633 here in the South Zone. There are also 247 active cases in Lethbridge. Wilson Middle School in Lethbridge has moved from COVID-19 watch to outbreak status. The Lethbridge School Division says there are currently 2 active cases at the school. Alberta Health Services defines an outbreak if there are 2 or more confirmed cases in a school setting. Officials say Wilson Middle School will remain open. Grade 7 and 8 students, like all middle schools in the province, shifted to at-home learning on November 30th. Grade 6 students will continue to attend in-person classes until the Christmas break. There's an Alberta MLA who says that his colleagues need to take a 20% pay cut during the COVID-19 pandemic. Cypress Medicine Hat MLA Drew Barnes says many people are hurting financially right now and the government needs to do its part. MLA Barnes joins me now from Medicine Hat. So you presented this idea to the Premier, and why do you feel that you need a pay cut?
To show some solidarity with private employees in free enterprise, many of which have had big pay cuts, lost their jobs, or on wage subsidy. I'm going to present it to the Premier. I actually already have, and I hope my entire MLA caucus colleagues will agree. And Hal, I'm also going to reach out to the NDP and ask for their support.
So what has the response been like from MLAs within the UCP caucus?
Well, the response has been great. First of all, from Albertans, over 600 have reached out since 8 o'clock this morning and said yes. And many of my MLAs have reached out to me, my colleagues, and said, yeah, way to go, I support that. And I'm expecting more to have that discussion, and I'm expecting more support.
Thank you so much. That was Drew Barnes, Cypress Medicine Hat MLA. By the way, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation says at $121,000 annually, Alberta's rank-and-file MLA salary is more than many of their counterparts in other provinces, including the Ontario West average, which is just over $105,000 a year. The new provincial restrictions mean that starting Sunday, a handful of city facilities will be closed. City Manager Greg Adair shared with specific places in Lethbridge that will include
the Stan Seawick and Nicholas Sharon Pool, the Corvan Ray YMCA and ATB Centre. In the ATB Centre, though, the physiotherapy, childcare, and retail tenants based will remain open following the public health guidelines. All arenas will be closed, including the ATB, Helen Schuler Nature Centre, CASA, the Multiculture Centre, the Galt Museum, Lethbridge Public Library, both downtowns and crossing branches, the SAG, the NMAX Centre will all be closed.
In light of the restrictions, Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman shared a message for the community.
Be safe, be kind, be patient. We're mindful of the economic uncertainty that many in our community are facing. The economic impact of the required public health measures will be widespread and it will be significant. It's essential that we find ways to support local businesses. Many businesses rely on this time of year for their livelihood. So I encourage all Lethbridge residents to find ways to support local businesses.
The province's new restrictions are having a negative impact on many businesses, including our restaurants. Loris Alexander caught up with the owners of Hickory Street in Sterling, Alberta, who discuss how the second lockdown will affect their business.
I understand why the government did it, and I think we need to take some drastic measures, but I'm really sad that it's taking such a dig at businesses and small businesses at Christmas.
Bone says right now is crucial for businesses to make a plan going forward. That's what her family did following the first lockdown earlier this year.
We said if this ever happens again, this is what we're going to do. So it's here again, and so I think we have these 4 weeks to build our following, to just rely on those people, our loyal customers, and really make a plan going forward, because 4 weeks, I think, is a pretty optimistic view.
Delivery comes at a time when a global pandemic has made it a necessary part of life, but simultaneously has left small businesses like Hickory Street struggling with logistics and high costs.
What you don't realize is that most of those companies take at least 20 to 30% of that bill. Restaurants run on a razor-thin margin, and if we're lucky, we have a 10% profit. So where that 20 to 30% is coming from, I don't know. And so we would highly encourage you to get out and go to the restaurant and pick up your food safely.
Despite yesterday's announcement, the Bones are staying optimistic and are encouraging other business owners and patrons to do the same, supporting each other in the process.
Everybody is suffering at some point right now, and if anything, if you can spend $5 at a local business or $10, that might help keep the lights on. It might help pay their rent. So, and honestly, business owners, it really helps to see people once in a while or get those little texts or get those messages. It's nice to see and just know that we're doing a good job and people are seeing it.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
In addition to restaurants, other businesses that offer personal services like haircuts and waxing will be closing their doors. As Jeanette Rocher reports now, it's leaving people a bit panicked about getting in their primping prior to the holiday season.
Tammy Demers says she awoke to more than 60 text messages from clients this morning.
By 9 o'clock in the morning, I had 61 text messages already. Everybody frantic about the news, which we are so devastated about.
As the owner of Reflection Salon, in order to fit in as many of her clients as she can, she'll be working around the clock until this Saturday when her salon has to close due to the new provincial restrictions on personal services.
I'll be going straight through from 8 in the morning till midnight on Saturday.
One of those clients is Laura Lee Bell.
I phoned yesterday after I heard the news that the salons would be closing, and I had an appointment booked for January 4th, and unfortunately, obviously that won't be happening, so they were gracious enough to fit me in.
We schedule people every half an hour, and we can only have one person in at a time per girl. But now, because of the restrictions, we are going to have probably all the girls work at the same time, but trying to keep our numbers down to keep everybody safe, which is very important to us. Because we have a lot of ladies. Some of our clients are 92 years old. We need to keep them safe.
And it's a similar story over at Wax Me, where owner Linda Nowak says business owners like her are feeling cheated.
I think most of us in the industry are actually quite disappointed because just less than a couple of weeks ago, it was announced how salons and personal services had absolutely no cases that have come from us. We're angry. All of us are very angry. We had 3 solid weeks of booked clientele that we're now trying to squeeze into 4 days.
For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Rocher.
While many business owners say they don't think that they can survive another shutdown, the province announced new funding on Tuesday. The relaunch grant allows for small and medium-sized businesses to obtain up to $20,000. The Business Council of Alberta is trying to get the word out to folks who may not be aware of the funding. The nonprofit group says the grant could be a lifeline for many local business owners.
These programs, especially this enhanced $20,000 grant, could very well be the lifeline that some small businesses need to make it through this. I'm also acutely aware, though, that with low revenues and costs coming in, sometimes even something like $20,000 won't be enough or won't sound like a lot of money. So my distinct hope is that these will help a lot of businesses, but I don't think in any respect that's going to make things easy. So as I look at Lethbridge in Southern Alberta, I think that there are a few unique items that are worth highlighting. One is that farm businesses have different restrictions that apply to them and are exempted from some of the restrictions. So that could be important for the folks in the surrounding area. I know that for many, this was a very strong harvest year. And so I hope that that ends up being kind of a bright economic light as agri-food and the agriculture business is looked at really for some strong economic recovery coming out of this period.
Federal support is also available for small to medium businesses, which includes rent and wage subsidies. The Lethbridge Soup Kitchen will officially become part of the Mustard Seed effective March of 2022. The Soup Kitchen will eventually discontinue food service at its current location when the Mustard Seed opens its new location in downtown Lethbridge.
We became aware that Mustard Seed was going to come to this city to set up a sober shelter along with some supportive housing options. And one of the things that was part of that contract with the government was to provide meals, 3 meals a day. And we started talking, well, we do 3 meals a day. And so then my suggestion, well, why don't we merge? And so they accepted that. Our board voted 100% in favor, as did theirs. And so we are just excited to be joining them in the near future. We don't know exact dates yet. There's some issues to resolve around a location and acceptable location, but it will happen, and we are just thrilled. We think it's wonderful.
Ginther adds that he and his board are excited about joining the Mustard Seeds outreach to bring meaningful change to people's lives. Due to the pandemic and the province's new COVID-19 restrictions put in place, the Lethbridge Firefighters Charities Association's Christmas auction will be held online. The goal this year is $10,000, with the funds going to support the Lethbridge Family Services Angel Tree Christmas campaign and blankets for seniors. The Lethbridge Fire Department Charities is a nonprofit group run by members of the Lethbridge Fire Department Local 237. It works to support local charities. You can bid on around 40 different items, and the bidding will continue until December 14th at 7 p.m. If you'd like to place a bid, you can find more information on the Bridge City News Facebook page. The provincial government announced that 13 staff will be laid off at the University of Lethbridge. A total of 12 caretakers and 1 administrative support person will lose their jobs on January 4th. In a release today, the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees says instead of inflicting painful cuts at colleges and universities, the province should be helping out-of-work Albertans upgrade their skills. Alberta Health Services announced today that planning is underway to recruit more registered midwives, giving families the option of a planned birth closer to home or at the health centre in Taber. The province says there are now 8 registered midwives serving in the AHS South Zone. The others are based in Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, and Brooks. Registered midwives provide maternal and newborn care from prenatal to labor and deliver up to 6 weeks postpartum. Around 3,500 families used midwifery services over the past year. There's been renewed calls for the Liberal government to boost health transfers to provinces and territories beyond the $42 billion budgeted for this year. Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet says convincing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that health care as a provincial jurisdiction should be a key goal of the First Ministers' meeting slated to kick off on Thursday.
It does badly need transfers. The amount has been established. The way to do it has been established, and it is quite obvious what would be done with that money, but this is not a decision that has to be made by Ottawa. This is a decision that has to be made by the government of Quebec and the provinces.
A small town in rural Missouri that saw a spike of COVID-19 cases in June has experienced a faith revival at the town's Community Baptist Church. The church's senior pastor says the pandemic has made for challenging times for many faith leaders.
From shut down with no cases to open, rapid spread to honestly on the opposite side, we in some ways, we are better off than a lot of places in the nation just because of the severity of the spread in such a short period of time. The growth of this church, the spiritual hunger of people is very different than what it was before.
I met my husband in Hawaii, and we've just been going through some rough relationship times, you know. Not just with him, but with families too. And just right now it's just the perfect time with people going through a rough time, with people dying. His dad just passed away with COVID just a couple months ago, and you know, it's time, you know.
So we have 5 different pastors that are here on Sundays. Throughout the day we have 5 services. And we've just come together. I mean, even though they don't all necessarily speak English, like we're here for each other. For instance, Pastor Darius had COVID, but he also has diabetes and he lost a leg during all that. So he was battling COVID and he lost his leg. And so Josh transports him to dialysis during the week to Fayetteville. If anyone's in need, we're here trying to love on each other and see to each other best we can.
I want to keep all my folks safe. I don't want any of my folks to get sick. We've shut down on 2 separate occasions. If a different version of Corona comes through, my people get sick again, we'll shut down again. With that being said, it doesn't stop what we do.
Well, it's starting to look a lot like Christmas here in southwestern Alberta. We had light snow today and cooler temperatures, and that cooling trend should remain. A complete look at the long-range weather forecast is coming up. It looked like a bit of a winter wonderland in many parts of southwestern Alberta today. Jeanette Roche is here now with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, the snow appears to be tapering off, but the cooler temperatures will remain?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Hal. Actually, the temperatures are going to get even colder than they were today. That snowfall will be ending overnight, though. We're going to see some 50K wind. -6 will be the overnight low. -1 into tomorrow with sunny skies. So as I was saying, that rain and snow will taper off. Sunshine for the rest of the weekend there. Friday, sunshine and -5, -3 the high for Saturday. And then we're going to dip even further into a minus double digit there for Sunday. Sunday, -10. -4 is our high for Monday, and -5 the high for Tuesday. So yeah, we're certainly getting into a little bit of the colder weather. Average high for this time of year, 1 degree, -11 is the average low. 14 was our high temperature back in 1957, and it was -37 back in 1977. Sun rose this morning at 8:17 a.m. and our Wednesday sunset will be at 4:31 p.m. this afternoon. As the days are getting shorter and shorter, we're getting closer to the shortest day of the year, coming up in about 10 or 11 days from now. Mix of sun and cloud over on the west coast here, mainly cloudy in Victoria, 7 degrees rather, in both Victoria and Vancouver. Edmonton's high -1 tomorrow with a mix of sun and cloud. Calgary should see some sunshine as well, with some wind gusts up to 40 or 50 km per hour. -1 is their high. Now there is a fast-moving low-pressure system coming across southern Saskatchewan and southern Manitoba, bringing with it some sloppy weather tonight. Those regions should dry off a little bit tomorrow. Regina's high tomorrow -4. Same for Saskatoon, -2 the high in Winnipeg, and they should see that snow into the morning, but it should taper off by around noon. A mix of sun and cloud expected tomorrow in both Toronto and Ottawa. 5 degrees the high in Toronto, 2 for Ottawa. Same thing for Montreal with a mix of sun and cloud. Now, as we get further into Atlantic Canada, we're going to be seeing a little bit more precipitation happening in some of these areas. Fredericton's a mix of sun and cloud, high of 1. Halifax will see that chance of flurries. 3 degrees is their high, 2 the high for Charlottetown. Charlottetown could see a mix of flurries and changing to rain later on in the day. Mix of sun and cloud expected for St. John's, Newfoundland. Although they will wake up to a sloppy commute tomorrow morning with quite a bit of rain, high of 2 degrees there. So there you go. That is your forecast.
Today's weather is brought to you, rain or shine, by the Gym in the North. Start your New Year's resolution today.
The Bank of Canada says positive news about a COVID-19 vaccine delivery will not be enough to give the Canadian economy a shot in the arm. The central bank held its key policy rate at 0.25% as it warned economic restrictions aimed at lowering coronavirus case counts will weigh on near-term growth. It says the restrictions will hold down growth for the first 3 months of 2021, and the trajectory will remain choppy until a vaccine is widely available. The bank says it will hold the policy interest rate as low as it can go until the 2% inflation target is achieved. It says it expects that to happen sometime in 2023. Economic Development Minister Mélanie Joly says marketing strategies for the tourism industry might need to shift away from attracting foreign visitors to Canada as COVID-19 keeps suppressing travel. She and her international counterparts have agreed that domestic travel is likely to take priority even after vaccinations begin. Joly says the new strategy would look to promote people traveling within their own regions that travel across the country before finally addressing international visitors once the pandemic is finally over. Dollarama announced a new pandemic bonus for its workers as it reported a 17% increase in its third quarter from a year ago. It says full-time employees will receive $300 while part-time workers will receive $200 in recognition of their dedication during the pandemic. The discount chain came under fire earlier this year from employees for ending the pay raise it had offered at the start of the pandemic. Dollarama also hiked its dividend as its reported third quarter earnings of almost $162 million as sales increased from $947.6 million to $1.06 billion in the same quarter last year. A First Nations chief from British Columbia says the COVID-19 pandemic has made it easier to explain how important high-speed internet is for small communities. Williams Lake First Nation Chief Willie Sellers says artisans in his community have been able to use Facebook and TikTok to promote their products while physical marketplaces are shut. He did say, however, that more reliable internet cannot come soon enough for people outside of major urban centers. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 79 points on the day to finish at 17,559. The Dow was down 105 points to 30,068. The S&P 500 was down 29 points to 3672, and the Nasdaq was down 243 points to 12,338. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 10 cents to 45.70 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 2 cents to 2.42 US. Gold was up 11 cents to 18.3965 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at 23.95 US an ounce. Wheat is at $269 per metric ton, barley's at $272, canola's at $5.86, and corn is at $292 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 20 cents to 110.75. Feeder cattle were down 55 cents to 136.85, and lean hogs were up 68 cents to 66.28. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 78.01 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Canada became just the third country in the world after Britain and Bahrain to approve the COVID-19 vaccine from Pfizer and BioNTech. This will clear the way for the delivery of 249,000 doses to arrive by the end of the month. That should be enough vaccine for around 125,000 people. Health Canada says everyone can feel confident that the review process was rigorous and that strong monitoring systems are in place. Even though a COVID-19 vaccine has been approved by Health Canada, many Canadians still have concerns about the drug's side effects. Political reporter Brian Lilley will discuss those concerns in just a moment. Canada will be receiving a vaccine to battle COVID-19. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that by the end of December, we'll be receiving around 249,000 doses. Joining me now to discuss this in a little more detail is one of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley from the Toronto Sun. Brian, the 249,000 doses is only enough to vaccinate, what, less than 0.5% of the population of Canada? Why such a low number?
Because that's what they could get. We've been hearing for weeks now, this whole issue of when will we get the vaccine started with comments directly from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau saying Canadians will have to wait behind other countries and watch other countries be vaccinated first. And that led people to say, well, why? When are we getting the vaccine? And of course, these comments came as both Pfizer and Mrna, the two early and leading candidates for vaccination, had put in requests for emergency use with the FDA in the United States and with the National Health Service in Britain. They've been approved in the National Health Service. They'll likely be approved by the FDA later this week. And the Brits and the Americans immediately said, if it gets approval, this is when we will vaccinate. And so both opposition politicians and people like myself in the media started saying, okay, well, if Health Canada approves, how soon after can we get the vaccine? And the Prime Minister didn't want to say. No one in the government wanted to say. They just kept saying things like, sometime in the third quarter. Well, that's from January 1st until March 31st. That's a long time. The government wouldn't give an answer better than that. I obtained documents last week from the military planning, General Jonathan Vance saying, don't expect vaccines until the spring thaw. So that's mid to late March. That got a lot of people worried. The government found a way to get up to, I want to be careful here because the Prime Minister emphasized this, up to 249,000 doses. I have to applaud him, Hal. I said if you got vaccine early, I would applaud him, and so I am. But it is just enough to vaccinate, if we get the full allotment, 124,500 people. It's going to be divided up by province, by population. So, Ontario will get about between 95,000, 99,000, and then it goes on from there. So Alberta will get maybe about a third of that. So enough to vaccinate maybe 15,000 people in Alberta. Here's part of the problem, though, is that that doesn't even look after all of our healthcare workers. It doesn't look after our frontline staff. It is something, but the main vaccination won't be happening until much later in late winter or early spring.
Yeah, the big question is who actually gets the vaccine first? Possibly the healthcare workers, some of our seniors. And how about the rest of us Canadians? Maybe by September? Is that what the Prime Minister said?
Well, they're trying to come up. Bottom line is it lies with the provinces, but there are, tables, at work between the federal and provincial governments, always discussing issues like this. And everyone seems to be on the same page. We saw the photos, the videos coming out of Britain the other day, the 90-year-old woman being the first person to be vaccinated outside of a clinical trial. William Shakespeare was the second guy. These were people in care homes. That will be the first. The people that care for people in care homes and the frontline healthcare workers will go next. And then eventually the rest of us. I wouldn't say that someone like you or I would be looking at getting a vaccine before summer, maybe late spring, but possibly summer. By the time we get through, we're expecting 6 million doses by the end of March. That's enough to vaccinate 3 million people. That would essentially take care of our healthcare workers, the most essential of them, and people over the age of 80. Then you start going down, people from 70 to 79. They're the next most at-risk group. People that have heart conditions fit into that. General Rick Hillier, who is leading Ontario's vaccine distribution program, said, don't expect things to ramp up really until April 1st. And then after that, it will take 6 to 9 months to look after the rest of us.
And we'll probably see some of the doses going out to a lot of our Indigenous communities as well here.
Yeah, and there is discussion about how they handled that. Is there a set aside for Indigenous communities? Is it part of the provincial allotment? You know, I can tell you that if you are in a remote Indigenous community, you're not going to be getting vaccinated with these first batches of the Pfizer vaccine. What we really have to hope for to speed up the vaccination program is that the vaccines from Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca come online quicker. Both the Pfizer and the Mrna vaccines need to be kept very cold. Pfizer at -70. And so far, the instructions from the company are once you move it, do not move it again. So once it's delivered, it can't go anywhere else. Well, across most of the country, the places that have freezers that can handle -70, Hal, those tend to be in major hospitals, research hospitals, in our major centers. So unless you can get to that location, you won't get that first batch of vaccine. So even people that are unable to move in long-term care homes may not get early doses of the vaccine. And it's definitely not going up to remote reserves. If you're next to an urban center, you might be in line.
Now, an important issue has been raised when it comes to liability, Brian. Some people are really concerned that this vaccine has been rushed, and there are questions about whether anyone will suffer any serious side effects as a result. Has the government really made that clear?
They haven't made it clear, but there tends to be a situation in, or an arrangement in situations like this for vaccines that the manufacturer for a pandemic vaccine will not be held liable. That liability will fall to the government of the day. And look, those are legitimate concerns on the issue of side effects. You don't have to be an anti-vaxxer to be concerned about side effects. One, these vaccines have been rushed for a good reason. They've been rushed. We want to get out of this bizarre life that we've all been living since COVID-19 hit, and a vaccine's one of the ways out. Secondly, there is also the issue of the first two candidates, both Pfizer and Moderna, are what's called mRNA vaccines. It's a new type of vaccine. It's not the traditional style. It has not been widely used before. It's been experimental. They've been trying to use it for things like cancer. There's a company just a few steps away from where I'm sitting now they're working at a Canadian company trying to come up with a COVID vaccine using this style, but their whole program before COVID was trying to find a cancer vaccine. It's been attempted for AIDS, so far unsuccessfully, but that's where this style of vaccine has been used. It's not widely used. So if there are serious side effects, who do you sue? The answer is likely going to be the federal government.
Now, there's been a lot of chatter of a possible reset to the economy. Brian, a lot of people are quite concerned about that. You've said the Liberals have been on again and off again with the idea, with the new appointment of a top bureaucrat. Now, you said the Liberals may actually be back on the reset bandwagon once again?
Yeah, this is the on again, off again saga. Remember, all through the summer, the Liberals were talking to every journalist they could find in Ottawa, and you'd see stories about how they're going to reframe the economy, reshape the economy, reset all these things. And then in the lead up to the throne speech, maybe about a week, 2 weeks out, you started seeing stories saying, the Liberals are now focused just on the pandemic. Turns out the idea of using the pandemic as an excuse to completely alter Canada's economic system didn't fly too well when it was polled, when they did focus groups. People said, can you just look after the pandemic and forget about these grand plans? So it was they said it was going on the back burner. Then the throne speech happened, and I said, no, that's still in there. Then the economic statement happened, and it's still in there. But an interesting thing happened. The day after the economic statement, the top official, the top bureaucrat at the Department of Finance, a guy named Paul Rochon, resigned. That's bizarre that the day after a massive fiscal document like this is delivered in the middle of a pandemic, that this guy just announces, I'm done. And then immediately thereafter, they announce Michael Sabia is going in. Now, normally nobody cares who the bureaucrats are, but Michael Sabia is not a bureaucrat. This is a political appointment to a bureaucratic post. That is something the Liberals would have criticized any previous government heavily for. Michael Sabia is someone who used to work at Bell, he used to work at CN Rail, ran the Quebec pension plan, but most importantly, he is politically on side Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland on this idea of using this crisis as a grand reset to fundamentally reshape the Canadian economy. That's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, but now that it's just a faceless bureaucrat in the background, well, the government can just get along with doing it and not talking about it.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau apparently has a very important meeting on healthcare later this week. It's to talk about regular health transfers. Now, Brian, you recently wrote that this shows why the premiers should just say no to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's call for more national social programs like childcare.
Yeah, well, look, the fiscal update that we were just talking about called for a national childcare program, a national pharmacare program, for national standards in long-term care. And some people might say, well, that's all fine. You know, why don't we have those? Why don't we have a national program for these? Well, all of these things are provincial jurisdiction, which means under the Constitution, the provinces are responsible for them. Under the healthcare deal that was struck when we brought out Medicare in the 1960s, the federal government said, hey, provinces, you sign on to this, you do this great program with us, we will pay 50% of the bill, you pay the other 50%, it'll be a great partnership, hand in hand, we'll do it. Well, since the 60s, it's just been dropping off. By the mid-70s, under Pierre Trudeau, it was down to 35%, the federal government share. By the mid-90s, under Chrétien, it was 14%. Under Paul Martin and Stephen Harper, it rose up to 22% by 2006 and stayed there until now. And so if someone's paying less than half of the bill that they said they would, Hal, and they come on and they say, hey, let's do another deal, are you going to say, yeah, you know what, that sounds great. Why don't I put out billions of dollars that I don't have, and you'll put up the other billions and then walk away and not pay the bill later? You know, they can't, if the feds won't pay their fair share of the bill for healthcare, what makes you think that after a year or two, they're going to keep paying for childcare and pharmacare and long-term care? It simply won't happen. I'm not a fan of governments passing money around. I know the saying there's only one taxpayer, but whatever government level of government is responsible for delivering the service is the one that I think should be taxing you for it. That way you know who to blame if things go wrong.
Brian, it's coming up on 2 years now since the two Canadian Michaels, Spavor and Kovrig, were abducted in China. Our Foreign Affairs Minister says progress is finally being made to potentially bring them home.
Well, that's what Francois-Philippe Champagne is saying, but he's not giving too many specifics. Not that I blame him. This is a sensitive and ongoing discussion. But I'm of the view, after talking to many people, that here's my worry, Hal, that China may be asking for a lot more than just the release of Meng Wanzhou. You've heard that Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei CFO, who was detained in Vancouver 2 years ago, may end up striking a deal with the U.S. Department of Justice. The Americans want her. We have her on an extradition warrant. She's fighting it in Canada. This could drag on for years. And the Department of Justice has apparently said, you know what? Admit you're guilty, pay a fine. You know, there will be some penalties for the company and you can go home. So far, she's always rejected that. Now they're in negotiations. And a lot of Canadians said, if she goes home, they'll release Kovrig and Spavor. Not necessarily. Canada's not part of the discussions between the Department of Justice and Ms. Meng. And I spoke to several people, former diplomats, who said there's a good chance that China will ask for more, including things like, do you remember CNOOC trying to buy Nexen or buying Nexen in the oil patch? And then the Harper government said, well, you know, we're going to have to review if a state enterprise wants to buy into our natural resources. China wants that lifted. They want other economic restrictions on them lifted. They may make demands like that in return for freeing Kovrig and Spavor. Demands that would not sit well in Canada, other than the fact that would get the two Michaels home. Whether to be home by Christmas, who knows?
And a Christmas card campaign has been launched for the two Michaels, even though the cards may not actually reach them. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this is guys like Guy Saint-Jacques, former ambassador, Charles Burton, former Canadian diplomat and retired professor with an expertise in China. Them and a bunch of others got together and said, you know what, let's put pressure on Chinese diplomats. And here's what you do. You take a Christmas card, you sign it, you fill it with best wishes for Kovrig and for Spavor, individually or together. You put it in an envelope, address it to them, put that envelope inside a bigger one and address that to the embassy in Ottawa or to the Chinese consulate and have them open it and see the card and feel shame and pressure for doing it. Now, I've had a couple of reactions to this. What does it accomplish? One, it would be pressure. It's one way of reminding them that Canadians have not forgotten about these two men. I've had other people say, well, China's not Christian, so it doesn't matter. How there are millions upon millions of Christians in China of all sorts. We don't have an easy count on them because many of them belong to illegal churches, but I'll give you one quick stat. The Catholic Church, which is a small one in China, has more members in that country than there are Canadians, and it's an illegal small church. Wow. So there are lots and lots of Christians in China, and there are lots of people that would support them. So yeah, think about doing that. And the other thing they ask you to do, snap a photo, post it on social media with the hashtag #FreeChinaHostages, and keep up the pressure.
That's a great idea. Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.
There is a nonprofit group which has been delivering hope to many around the world for a very long time. It is Mission Aviation Fellowship, a Christian organization that uses airplanes to bring the love of God in tangible ways to thousands of isolated communities around the globe. Joining me now is the CEO of Mission Aviation Fellowship, Brad Bell, joining me from Guelph, Ontario. Welcome to Bridge City News, Brad.
Thank you, Hal. Good to see you again.
You too. Now, how would you best explain what Mission Aviation Fellowship is all about in a more specific way?
Yeah, so you mentioned our mission statement, sharing God's love through aviation and technology. We're in about 30 countries, and we use our aircraft to deliver medical and food aid. And those same aircraft also transport local pastors and evangelists and doctors. So the work is quite varied between each country, but that's typically what we do. One of the main things I think that makes us different from some other agencies is that our mission staff live in the countries with the people that they serve. So they're almost all overseas.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how do you work with some of the volatile areas, especially when some governments may be corrupt, trying to get into those countries. But if you have boots on the ground and locals that you work with, it makes it a little bit easier, I guess, does it? To try and reach the most vulnerable.
It helps, and we've been in the countries typically for decades or many, many decades, and so we've been able to build trust with local officials and government officials, and they understand that we are there to help, and that really helps a lot.
So how and when did your group actually get started with Mission Aviation Fellowship?
So we're pretty old, older than me. This is our 75th anniversary. We started just after World War II, and there was a number of pilots that were really passionate about flying, and they had just served in the war, and they wanted to use airplanes for good. They wanted to use airplanes for God's glory. And so they started simultaneously actually in England and the United States, and that grew and grew to us now being, as I mentioned, in over 30 countries. So the elevator pitch that I use is that one of our aircraft is taking off or landing every 4 minutes. So it's pretty busy. Yeah.
Wow. Now you mentioned just after the Second World War. Where was the actual first flight and who flew it?
So we're kind of proud of that. The first flight was flown by a woman, Betty Green, a young lady at the time, and she flew some Wycliffe Bible translators into a remote camp in Mexico. And I mean, we're just proud of that because it's a neat part of our heritage that a woman was the first flight. And Betty served as a WASP, so she was actually in the U.S. Air Force helping to ferry aircraft into the war zones.
I was reading on your website, Brad, that Mission Aviation Fellowship has made over 52,000 flights, carried around 150,000 passengers, hauled over 5 million kilograms of cargo, and covered 7.2 million kilometers. Who specifically does Mission Aviation Fellowship serve?
Wow, so that's a big question. We fly staff and missionaries for Wycliffe and Samaritan's Purse, Red Cross, World Vision, and about 1,500 other partners. And in many countries, we fly pastors and evangelists from the local church to visit the remote congregations. But we also do medical work in those countries. So in Angola, for example, we do something called a medical safari. And we'll take a plane and a pilot and a team of doctors and nurses, and we'll go out for a week, and we'll stop in remote villages, and the doctors will set up clinics, and they'll do surgeries in just some incredibly remote places. And then the whole group will stay overnight, and they'll get up the next morning and they'll fly on to the next village.
Now, you mentioned Samaritan's Purse. One of the stories we recently had on Bridge City News was how they've set up field hospitals in the Bahamas, helping, with the second wave of COVID-19. So are you doing that as well, flying in some of their doctors and some of their nurses too, to help those most vulnerable?
Yeah, generally not. I mean, Samaritan's Purse has significantly less aircraft, but they have some big aircraft where they can fly in these mobile hospitals. No, the work that we would do with them would be over in Africa, where we're flying smaller teams and smaller aircraft into more remote locations.
So Brad, can you share a specific story or two of the difference that Mission Aviation Fellowship flight has made to those you serve?
Yeah, so a couple stories. Our impact in different countries is unique. We operate differently in each country. So Nepal, for example, you'll recall a few years ago there was a bad earthquake, and our emergency response team arrived in country just a few days after. We set up an office, opened that up, and we had partners literally lined up out the door, down the stairs, and around the block, and so we were able to work with some amazing organizations to fly in food and building supplies and doctors and engineers to help reconstruct a lot of the villages that have been destroyed. I was in South Sudan about a year ago, actually about a year ago this time, and I was out on a long flight, about an 8-hour flight with one of the Canadian pilots, and we stopped in a number of villages, and we had to refuel, and we were also dropping and picking up people. And one of the teams that we picked up, we stopped in a village, and we picked up a group of men from a U.S. church, and they had been at a remote hospital installing a solar panel system, a high-powered solar panel system. And the weeks prior, we had delivered the team. We'd flown them out. We'd flown out their solar panels. So there's a lot of kerfluffle, and we're getting ready to leave. And the head nurse from the hospital comes out, and she introduced herself, and she said to me, we have a lot of power failures out here. And what these men have done means that I won't have to hold a baby dying in my arms because the power's failed and the oxygen pumps failed. And the baby can no longer survive. And wow, that really hit me. And so, that's some of the impact, along with our partners, that we're able to have in many places in the world.
That definitely touches a lot of people's hearts. Tell me about some of the other rewards you get out of heading up Mission Aviation Fellowship Canada.
Me personally, or the organization?
No, you personally, as the CEO. Talk to me about it.
Wow. Well, I used to be. I started my own technology company at a university, so I did entrepreneurial tech for 26 years. And I was just in an interview earlier today talking about how meaningful this work is, how important it is to be able to have this impact on people's lives, to be able to share the gospel. It has just been incredibly rewarding. And most days I am just honored and humbled and proud to be able to be part of this organization. And because the organization is 75 years old, there's a real sense that I'm really just the current caretaker, that this organization has had a tremendous legacy. And so it's just a privilege to be part of that.
That's a wonderful, wonderful attitude to have. Brad, what about some of the major challenges that you have with MAF?
Well, like any other organization, there's lots of complexity to deal with and fundraising and that kind of thing. COVID has been tough. I know it's been hard on everybody. Our field staff, back in March when COVID hit, we didn't really know what that was going to look like. Nobody knew. And our field staff, along with our leadership, made the decision that our staff would stay in the field because they wanted to serve the people that they lived with in case there was a need, in case they were able. And so COVID's been difficult. Some countries, they don't allow us to fly at all. Other countries allow us to fly, but only medical. Some countries we can fly as normal. And so COVID has just brought a myriad of challenges. Some of our staff needed to return home because they have family members that are sick, parents that are aging, and that's been a challenge. And so we've spent a lot of time and energy just coping through that, and God has blessed us through all that. But like other organizations, and I want to be careful. I know this has impacted everybody, so I don't want to make it sound like we're hard done by. We're not. We've been blessed, but it certainly has been a challenge.
So Brad, let me ask you something. Where do you receive a lot of your funding?
So, we're kind of unique. About 97% of our funding comes from private individuals. So, for a charity our size, that's really weird. Typically, a charity our size would be getting a significant portion of their funding from government or from foundations. And we are just incredibly blessed with a really dedicated group of supporters that have funded us for years and years. So it's a real privilege to be able to represent those donors when we go out and do all that work.
Now, you talk about flying into some of these remote areas, and I'm thinking maybe some of different countries around the world where there might be some of that instability. Do you ever fear for your safety as you're flying into a lot of these regions?
Well, when the CEO goes to visit one of the programs, which I'm privileged to be able to do a couple times a year, I never feel unsafe because I'm with staff that have lived in the country, that know the locals. I want to be careful that I don't sound smug about that, because I know there is danger in some of the countries, but I do feel quite well protected. But clearly our staff at some points are in danger, and it's by the grace of God that they're kept safe. And it varies from region to region. We're in a lot of different parts in the world. I think of one country last year where we had to make the difficult call of evacuating all of our staff during the summer because there was danger. So it does vary, but we also operate, or we try and operate in a very safe mode, and we're constantly assessing what we think the risk level is in order to keep our families safe. Because it's not just our pilots and our engineers that are there, our families live there.
So how are Jesus and God brought up in a conversation when you're helping those who are most vulnerable in these different regions? How do you bring up the love of Christ in these conversations as you're helping people?
Well, that looks different in every place that we're serving. Sometimes if we're flying an evangelist or a pastor into a remote village to do a tent meeting, it's pretty clear why we're there, and we're sharing with staff about our Christian life and our Christian values. In other places, it's simply that we're there. It's simply that we're there to do a medevac, to bring a sick patient back. And a lot of what we do, I often say this, it's the work that our pilots and engineers and that they do is amazing, but the work that our spouses do is in some cases almost more. So that they're helping do a homeschool, or they're teaching at a school, or they have a group of people over at their home and every week, and they're just visiting, and they're just living life with these people. And I was in Uganda last year. One of the wives has a street ministry for street kids. And every week she goes and she works with 50 to 100 street kids, and they do reading and they do singing and they feed them and just doing life and just sharing God's love. So, it just looks different everywhere we are.
And I can imagine learning about all the different cultures and foods and languages. That's also quite rewarding as well. How many aircraft do you have? I'm just curious.
About 130. Yeah, so, one of the other taglines is we have the world's largest fleet of small aircraft. A lot of those are Caravans and Kodiaks, which would be 10 or 12-seater aircraft. So substantial, I like to call them large little aircraft. So substantial aircraft that can carry a lot. And then, of course, we have some smaller 4-seaters and that kind of thing as well.
How is Mission Aviation Fellowship planning for the future to ensure that your group remains effective and has a big impact in countries around the globe?
That's a big question. So, I'll touch on one area. So one of the areas that we've started to look at in the last 5 years is something called disruptive technology. And disruptive technology, you'd be familiar with that, Uber. Look what Uber's done to the taxi industry, or Airbnb to the hotel industry. And so we're vigilant for technologies that might be disruptive in a harmful way, but could also be disruptive in a positive way. So I'll give you an example. One of those technologies is electric flight. we think there's a lot of promise in electric flight. It has the potential to reduce our costs by almost 100-fold. And that would allow us to do, just incredible. So that would allow us to do more ministry for less dollars. It would allow us to fly people that could never have afforded our services before. And some of the electric flight does vertical takeoff and vertical landing. So, we need airstrips. We don't need big airstrips. We don't need fancy airstrips. They can just be grass strips, but we need some form of flat airstrip right now to land. If we could do vertical takeoff and vertical landing, then, we'd be able to reach even more remote locations than we can now.
So outside of airstrips, what are some other key areas where you're asking for prayer when it comes to your ministry?
Yeah, so a couple of areas that come to mind. COVID and the impacts of COVID this year. I don't know about you, but I've been on a lot of calls where people are just tired of COVID. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm whining. We are incredibly blessed, but COVID's been hard, and we have families overseas that were supposed to come home this summer that couldn't. Some of them are feeling isolated. We've had a couple of instances where families have had family members pass away, and they were unable to return home, and that's tragic. So, just prayer for that. It's hard for everybody. And then just our general prayer request is for safety. We do something that's dangerous. We fly aircraft all over the world, and we fly safely, but we never want to take that for granted. And so we just constantly ask for prayer for safety.
Amen. Brad Bell, CEO of Mission Aviation Fellowship, thanks for joining me today from Guelph, Ontario.
Thank you so much for having me on the air. Bye-bye.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.